Hi, my name is Duncan Wood. I'm the President and CEO of the Pacific Council on International Policy, a membership-based organization focused on international affairs with a heavy focus on the Pacific Rim. This has really been a historic year for Mexico. In the June 2nd elections, of course, we saw Claudia Sheinbaum, the candidate for the ruling Morena party, win an overwhelming majority in the popular vote, becoming the first woman president of Mexico. And that's historic in and of itself, that we have, finally a woman head of state, head of government in Mexico. But it's also historic because the levels of support that she got at 60% of the popular vote, a supermajority in the Chamber of Deputies, a supermajority in the Senate, more than a majority of the state level legislatures. We now have an unprecedented opportunity, at least in the democratic era, for a Mexican president to put in place and to execute an ambitious program in terms of legislation, in terms of executive actions, where she can really move the country in the direction that she thinks it should move. And that's important because, of course, Mexico faces a lot of challenges like many countries, but it also is on the brink of an enormous opportunity in terms of economic growth. On at least a superficial level, you see that the economic program of Claudia Sheinbaum is a continuation of what Andrés Manuel López Obrador was doing. And certainly we saw that during the election campaign. We saw it in the sort of the election manifesto for Morena, that there was a lot about continuing the so-called fourth transformation of Mexico that AMLO had begun. Heavy focus on economic redistribution, on making sure that, for example, women's issues are taken care of, a new pension for women over the age of 60, real concern about the opportunities being offered to women in the economy, focus on healthcare and education, the kind of things that you would expect from a more left-leaning government. But really behind the scenes, I think what we're seeing is that there are a lot of folks who are now working in the government who understand the importance of working with the private sector. And we're seeing this across the board, with industrial associations, with chambers of commerce. For example, just a couple of days ago, there was a meeting of the energy industry in Mexico, and representatives of the government came along and talked about the importance of partnership and working with them. And we're not going to go back to the kind of halcyon days of the Peña Nieto government between 2012 and 2018, or the Felipe Calderón and Fox governments between 2000 and 2012. But it's at least, I think, an opening and a softening of the stance that we saw under López Obrador. And so what I see is that there is a recognition on the part of the Mexican government, of the Sheinbaum administration, that they really do need economic growth to maintain their legitimacy. And that means working with the private sector. Will they be willing to do whatever the private sector has to say to them? Absolutely not. I mean, ideology will continue to play a role. The perception of working in the interest of the people rather than the elites will be very, very important. But I do see, at least at this point in time, an opportunity for a coming together, what the Mexicans would call an acercamiento between the private sector and the government. If President Sheinbaum was to give me a call today and say, Duncan, I need your advice, what should our priorities be? I'd come up with a relatively short list of things. One, getting the energy sector right is going to be very, very important. Reducing the costs of electricity production, making sure that there is enough clean energy in the system, and making sure, most importantly, that there is a reliable energy supply for business, for investors. That has to be an absolute priority. And the previous administration didn't do a good job with that. So that's a situation that needs to be fixed. Also on energy, on the oil and gas front, there's so much that can be done if only they will open themselves up to collaboration with the private sector. There are still investors out here in the United States, in Canada, and throughout the world that look at Mexico as an opportunity if only the regulatory framework was right. At the moment, there's a great deal of hesitation about investing in the energy sector because the correct signals haven't been sent. And I think this is a great opportunity. At the beginning of a new administration, this can be the right time to send those signals. Secondly, Mexico desperately needs to raise its taxation, its revenue. And the way to do that is to boost economic growth. So working with the private sector to say, what is it that you need to be able to increase your investments, increase your own profits, so that in turn you're paying more in taxes to the Mexican government. That's something which is a win-win for President Sheinbaum. She will get economic growth, which the private sector are going to love, and she'll also get greater tax revenue, which is essential if she's going to fulfill her priorities in terms of social programming. And I guess the last issue that I would point to is to say, work very, very closely with the United States. And that means, sitting down and having often difficult conversations about trade and investment disputes which are on the books. Let's try to get those resolved. It's fine for friends and partners to have disputes, but they need to be resolved quickly so that they don't really leave a nasty taste in the mouth. They don't damage the relationship long term. And I see that there's an easy way out of a lot of these disputes that are currently on the books between Mexico and the United States. It just requires the political will to do so. I think long-term Mexico is an incredible bet. You look at its profile, its demographic profile, its geography being, right next door to the United States and sharing a 2,000-mile long border. The fact that impressive investments have taken place in infrastructure. You've got a workforce which is relatively well trained and educated and ultimately trainable by the private sector. Mexico's a really good bet. The timing of the investment matters in terms of what's the bang for your buck that you're going to get in the exchange rate. But perhaps more importantly, or a lot more important than that, I would say, is really, are you going to get the certainty the legal certainty on your investment that you're looking for? And that's a question that the current Mexican administration really needs to answer. They need to provide those kinds of guarantees to foreign investors. If you can get the formula right, Mexico's a great bet to make. It has all the pieces there ready to work in favor of a better bottom line for businesses. We already have the strong cross-border relationships. And what I see is that Mexico has an incredibly bright future if only it can seize the opportunity that's presented right now by nearshoring, by the strength of the US economy, and of course, by this geopolitical, geoeconomic realignment that we're seeing at the global level.